Hi, my name is Morgan. I'm an illustrator and concept artist, and in this video tutorial series I'll try to demystify some color theory, hopefully provide a practical approach for picking the right colors in a painting. I'm going to break this series up into three parts. The first will be on the elements of color, or what makes colors different from each other and how to define them, and also a bit on how to navigate some common digital color workspaces, such as the stock Photoshop color picker, this guy, and or similar add-ons like Coolorus that basically do the same thing. Then we'll look at our perception of color and how that affects what we put onto the canvas, the reasons why colors are the way they are, and also some different lighting conditions that can affect our color choices. And finally, I'll try to provide some methods for choosing colors that are both pleasing to look at and faithful to reality. Alright, before I go any further, I should probably just say that these kind of color spaces are basically the same as the default UI, except this square is turned 45 degrees and like squished this way. But apart from that, it's exactly the same. So every color can be defined by three different properties: hue, chroma, or saturation, which is a slightly different thing, but don't worry about that for now, and value. I'll start with value, as that's, in my opinion, the most important of the three. Value, which is more or less up and down, or more or less diagonal in the default, and more or less up and down in Coolorus. I say more or less because these workspaces, like they don't quite respect value just moving straight up and down, but I'll hopefully explain that a little bit later. Value describes how light or dark, or how black or white a color is. This is how the human eye actually recognizes form. Separate from the color receptors is a part of our vision that looks for light and dark. And from that information, naturally, without us even really having to think about it, spatially reasons, or in English, judges the where and what of objects. So to help me illustrate how important values are, or tone, or shading, or whatever you want to call it, is I brought up this painting that I wish I could say was done by me. I'm not entirely sure who did it. But and I've got two layers, one which will kill the color information in the image, and the other which will kill the value information, or just flatten it into one value. Alright, let's remove the hue and the chroma from this image. Now, as you can see, you can still tell what's going on. You can still tell what it is. We'll turn that layer off. Now, if I remove the value information, there's color information, but it's pretty difficult to know what's going on. Hopefully, this shows you how important values are for making the image read, in inverted commas. I think I can safely say that infinitely more images or paintings, including my own, fail because of neglecting values rather than that of hue or chroma. Speaking of which, the hue of a color pertains to its position on the color wheel. So blue, yellow, green, red, etc., independent of value or chroma. Chroma, as the name implies, is a measure of how chromatic, or how gray and neutral, a color is. Now, it's worth mentioning that each hue has a maximum chroma at a certain value. For example, a maximum chroma blue has a relatively dark value. There's no way to push the value higher without losing some of its chroma. Whereas on the flip side, yellow has a relatively high value at maximum chroma. So there's no real way to lower it without turning it into brown. And also, like, it's not pure white. If you want to raise the chroma, then raise the value, you're going to lose some chroma as well. Also, a lot of people mistake chroma and saturation as being the same thing. They are almost, but the twist is chroma moves this way, whereas saturation moves more downwards. Basically, like, chroma is attached to the value, whereas saturation is independent of value. So you can have, I know that probably doesn't make a lot of sense. So you can have a high saturation yellow that's almost black, but you can never have a high chroma yellow at this value. So in other words, chroma is more a measure of brightness, whereas saturation is more a measure of, like, how much juice that hue has, independent of value. Now, what I said about each hue having a maximum chroma value is super important, as it allows us to play with values by shifting the hue rather than just adding black or white to a specific hue or color. Not only is this much more pleasing to the eye, but it's also how things work in the real world. For example, if you look at a fire, you'll notice that as it gets closer to the center, the hue gradually shifts from red, which is a low value maximum chroma hue, to yellow, which is the opposite. That's quite an extreme example, but it also applies to light bouncing off objects, particularly with warm light sources. But we'll get more into that in part 2. Alright, so hopefully I haven't butchered and overcomplicated things too much, but I know a lot of people struggle, myself included, especially in the beginning, with what color to pick, because, you know, once you break down colors into these 3 properties, it's easy to imagine how many different colors you can get from these combinations. But the most important thing to take away from this is that if you want something to look real, getting the values right is the thing to concentrate on. Black and white is factual, albeit a little boring, and hue and chroma is a little more subjective and open to interpretation. Alright, that pretty much sums up part 1. Even though this is all pretty boring theoretical stuff, it's kind of a prerequisite for the stuff I'll be covering in part 2, where I'll get into some more actionable stuff like lighting conditions and color schemes. So thanks for watching. Hopefully you learned something new, and I'll throw up a link here to part 2 when it's done. And yeah, keep making art. Peace.